Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in cybersecurity strategies. With me on today's show are Wanda Jones-Heath, Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Air Force, VENICE GOODWINE, Chief Information Security Officer at USDA, Shane BARNEY, Chief Information Security Officer at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Chris USSERMAN, Principal Security Architect at Infoblox, Jim RICHBERG, Field Chief Information Officer, Fortinet, and John Powers, VP of U.S. and Federal Sales at BMC Software. Well, we got multi-clouds out there, we got hybrid clouds out there, we got zero trust, SOC consolidations, an explosion of technology, great mix of agencies and departments here, and a whole bunch of partners that are helping make all this happen. So Wanda, let's start with you. A lot of activity going on over there at the Air Force, and I just can't imagine trying to secure satellites and aircraft and bases and deal with the defense industrial base. A lot on your plate. Why don't you give us a state of the state as to what's happening over there these days?
Oh, good afternoon, Luke and team. Thank you from Team Air Force. As you mentioned, we have a lot of great activity underway in the Air Force. We've made progress, and we do understand that we do have more things to accomplish. I'll start out by saying that I've drafted a cybersecurity strategic plan, and this is going to be our roadmap for the entire department to enable us to properly identify and secure all of our assets. We're continuing to leverage pen testing, bug bounties. We just commissioned the start of Hack the Air Force 5.0. We're continuing to find and fix those critical vulnerabilities and gaps. We have reformed our risk management process. I've talked about it before. Fast Track ATO is continuing to be a great way for us to secure and address risk at every level. We've also provided a guide on our organization risk tolerance baseline. That allows us to give our folks the left and right bounds to ensure that we are doing the right things. The initial phases are underway and we're seeing progress. And then lastly, we're continuing to focus on DevSecOps. And what I want to do is operationalize that now and continuous ATO. So that's just a snippet of just some of the things that have been going on with the department. And like I mentioned before, we have a lot of different initiatives underway.
Sounds like it, and I hear a lot about DevSecOps, and a really important element of trying to deliver very quickly in regards to getting those ATOs delivered. And I know we all have this dream of ATO in a day, right? VENICE, a lot of activity going on over at USDA. I know that you were working very hard on doing your SOC consolidation based on some good logic and good standards and taking the emotion out of it, et cetera. How's everything going over there? A lot of moving parts these days.
Absolutely. Good morning to you and of course my panel members. So first of all, my initiatives at the department are based on how I measured. And as you noticed, we just received the FATARA scorecard. And so that was a huge accomplishment really from cybersecurity, because a year ago when we started this, you know, we had a failing grade in cybersecurity, but I'm proud to say here we are 1 year later and we've increased our grade 2 letters. And so now, while I still have a C and I know that's average, we're definitely on our way to improving our cybersecurity score here at Department of Agriculture. And that's a whole of USDA effort, myself, my team, as well as the mission areas. And so, of course, and part of that is including our CAP goals as well, our cross-agency priority goals set by the President's Management Agenda. Again, we're improving. There are 10 CAP goals. We're mastering 9 of those 10. And so my team is hard at work making sure that we're meeting all of our regulatory, law, policy, regulatory requirements. But back to your mention about the SecOps consolidation, yes, we've now reorganized our individuals. And when you take 29 staff offices and agencies and combine all of the SOC functions into one under one roof, you must imagine that definitely is somewhat of a challenge, right? Because of the way the agencies are funded individually. But we've been able to do that. We've been able to unify our processes, and more importantly, through my tools rationalization, we've been able to really to minimize the multiple tools that provided the same capability across the enterprise. And one other thing that we're doing that I support as a CISO is our end user consolidation, where now we have one single service provider at the department providing those desktop services. And as I've always said, you know, business drives cybersecurity. And so as being one of those foundational elements, it's been huge for us to make that transition, as well as closing, of course, our data centers. And that's, for me, is as a CISO, is important because now my attack surface, you know, really diminishes. And so that's good for me, including flattening networks. So just like my other counterparts as well, continuing to manage risk. We have versions of an agile ATO, fast track ATO, where we're trying to meet, you know, the business needs of the mission areas. So yes, very busy at Department of Agriculture. And so glad to be on today to talk about some of those things.
It sounds like you've got a lot of moving parts going on. Congratulations. I know that takes a lot to go 2 letter grades in a huge agency like that. So hats off to everyone over there. I'm sure that SOC consolidation activity probably helped that. Shane, a whole bunch of activity going on over at U.S. Immigration and Citizenship Services. I know there's a lot of activity in regards to hybrid cloud, multi-cloud implementation, SOC consolidation, assessments, et cetera. Give us a state of the state as to what's going on over there these days.
Way too much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And it is truly nice to be part of an actual cybersecurity panel as opposed to some cloud thing. So that's really great. You know, USCIS is unique in a number of different ways, but primarily, you know, we are a very cloud heavy organization. We started in cloud probably 10 years ago. At this point, we're 80, maybe even 85% cloud based. That alone itself has driven a number of initiatives. And so when I stepped into the role of CISO, almost 2 years ago, coming up on 2 years, we also at about that same time recognized some significant changes in our threat landscape, and realized we had to retool our entire program from the ground up. And so we did that. We reissued it. We created a brand new cyber initiative, an enhanced cybersecurity strategy, got that approved by senior leadership all the way up to the department, and really began focusing first and heavily on ending our compliance mindset, moving towards a very heavy risk-based model. We were well on our way already, but we really had some elements that were left over for kind of like an old school approach to security. We also began focusing heavy on data. As an agency, you know, we're not the biggest federal agency on the planet, but at the same time, we still managed to generate 7 terabytes worth of log data a day. Clearly the data is critical for us. We need to focus on that data and begin utilizing it to our advantage as opposed to just collecting it. And finally, we needed to recognize the chaos. You know, part of cybersecurity is a chaotic world, and we needed to become a more fluid, more nimble security organization. You know, we adopted a more ops-based approach to how we do security. Even within the SOC, we use chat ops now as opposed in our incident response. We focused heavily on automation, and we deployed, you know, a SOAR tool to begin pulling in all this information so that I could end the days of having people stare at screens looking for alerts. Actually, I don't have that anymore. Now what I have is an entire SOC made up of threat hunters, because that's really where the future is. And so moving and modernizing all those aspects of the security program has really been my focus and has continued to be my focus, and a number of initiatives along that front.
It sounds fantastic. I know there's a fast moving target with all the DevSecOps activity that's going on, the multi-cloud. Yep. And being able to instrument that and put the tools in place to allow you to get into that more of a threat hunting sort of posture, I'm sure is very important. Chris, I would imagine that InfoBlocks is right smack in the middle of those types of things and helping these department and agencies instrument themselves to the point where they can enable this type of capability and secure it and then manage based on risks. Hearing a lot about risk today.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And good morning. I think the interesting aspect of it is Shane hit it, a lot of it pretty well, of what we want to hear from customers about what they're doing and the successes they're having. The agencies that we work with across the FedCiv, the DoD, and the IC, they're starting to realize the benefits of the value of visibility and containment in real time. As the number of alerts increases, that's one of the biggest challenges is with a decentralized workforce that we have now, it's even more imperative that you have an understanding of the actionable nature of all of the network intelligence that comes from those 7 terabytes of logs, for example, and what to make of that. And then combining that, marrying that up with the necessary threat intelligence to say, what do I prioritize? What do I look for? What's related? How do I contain this particular threat and classify it and rank it? And then relying on those ecosystem automations to rapidly detect, contain, mitigate, and remediate those threats. So that's where we're seeing a lot of benefit with the agencies we're working with.
Sure. And, it's really about putting capability in. So, you can find a needle in a stack of needles almost, right? Jim, how about over at Fortinet? You all are right smack in the middle of the ecosystem trying to enable this environment, make sure it stays secure. What are you seeing out there? What's the state of the state these days?
So good afternoon, Luke. Well, that's entirely correct. And, Fortinet is a company that has over 40 product lines, and we try to figure out how to harness those to the benefit of our government customers. And Chris alluded to the fact that AI-driven automation is key to this, that we in the industry have essentially been doing AI and machine learning long enough that it has gotten increasingly powerful to the point where we can now characterize network activity in real time to know what's normal and then what's abnormal. And neural networking can tell you what's abnormal and something you simply want to monitor and what is on balance probably malicious. So you can see this while it's coming in, hitting a target. Before it's succeeded, you can put a block in place there and you can block it globally. And not only have we started to develop that kind of power, but with that increasing power, it's become more, we've been actually able to make it simpler as well as it becomes more sophisticated. So now we're at the point where we can say, here's standalone versions that government customers can actually deploy in their network on premise, because you've got data where you don't even want the telemetry going off premise. So now we can actually help them with AI to say, here is security driven AI. You can deploy, it reports to your SOC, and it's only going to get smarter as it develops. So we're really excited about that potential that we're now starting to bring to some of our government partners.
Very super sophisticated high-end tools, which are extremely impressive. John, BMC's been around quite some time. You've been on this journey with us as we've gone from sort of traditional legacy environments into these modern environments. What are you seeing out there, and where is BMC sort of positioning themselves to continue on this journey and help us, secure these environments?
Yeah. So good afternoon, and thanks for having me. So when we look at where we're headed, where BMC is really focused, unlike maybe the traditional scanning, or think of it in terms of antivirus or those kind of things, a lot of the things that we're doing is really focused around blind spot detection, remediation, vulnerability management, and closed loop compliance, right? So as we look at, I'm gonna actually cheerlead for a couple of our panelists here in terms of Venus and Wanda here for a second. USDA, Venus was talking about some of the things that's going on there. I think some unbelievable strides here. Made USDA is a significant customer of ours, and very happy to have Venus here. And like I said, I'm going to cheerlead that organization here for a second. So, like I said, a lot of what we're doing, there, with USDA is so much around blind spot detection. Over 90% of physical infrastructure as well as platform as a service, recognized, resolving orphan IPs, shoring up some of those vulnerabilities. So things that are sitting that were unknown, sitting out on the network, and being able to take care of those, resolving orphan IPs and that kind of thing. So the other thing that is really kind of exciting here is looking at so many of the things, whether it's patches or otherwise. Usually those are known vulnerabilities, right? And at USDA, they've been able to really auto-populate a configuration management database, prioritize and deploy patches based on full visibility and application mapping, that kind of thing. So what was once, I think, a very Herculean effort over 13,000 man hours, let's say a year ago, to patch servers is all the way down to 912, right? That's a over 90% efficiency gain. So just tremendous strides made by USDA, and I'll cheerlead here for a second with the Air Force as well. Some really unbelievable strides, I think, recently made over there around mapping out some dependencies and building out operational service models over 40,000 servers, right? So phase 2 of that is ingestion of vulnerability data into an automation console, prioritize patching infrastructure and endpoints, and then finally consistency of server image configuration and policy adherence, allowing for far more consistent visibility and really mitigation or elimination of those blind spots. So
sure.
Yeah.
Really appreciate being able to take that type of technology and help them sort of deal with this massive attack surface. Speaking of massive attack surfaces, Venus, let's go over to you and just tell us about the priorities. Got a lot of activity going on. What are the priorities sitting in front of you, say, over the rest of this year, sort of rolling into next year?
Yeah, so Luke, as I stated, business drives cybersecurity. So the things that the mission areas and the business owners need to do to deliver, USDA services drives my priorities. So in order for me to enable that, one of the things we're embarking upon is how do we use the RPA, the robotic process automation, really to simplify some of our processes and really allow people to do what we call, that high level work. And so from a cybersecurity perspective, how do I secure a non-person entity? Because, we rely on identity proofing with individuals, but how do you do that when it's a bot? So that's been great for us as we've moved into really maximizing the use of RPA, not just in our financial section of Department of Agriculture, but now within the mission areas. And so that's one. The other thing is, of course, I continue to manage risk. And so as we've moved to, version 2 of 837, the risk management framework, I've also implemented, I spent this entire year planning for RMF 2.0. And so October 1st will be the kickoff where we'll do a re-education of our entire roles and responsibilities from the authorizing official, down to the ISSO, just so they understand really what does it mean to accept risk. And then the next step in that would be to quantify that risk. Haven't decided on a model yet, but still exploring. I'm working with my Department of Energy. They're using the FAIR model, so we're taking a look at the work that they've done. So trying to figure out how can we really quantify risk so that when we talk about buying down risk, we actually know the cost of that risk. And so, of course, then lastly, of course, can't not miss talking about zero trust, right? So one of the things we did, not only, we're closing the data centers 39 to 2 and then flattening our networks, that really helps us and ushers us into the zero trust journey. How is the data accessed? Where is it accessed from? Accessed by whom? And if you had trust yesterday, does that mean you have trust tomorrow? So having all of that technology in place, and zero trust is technology agnostic. So I know that it will be, multiple vendors within my journey on zero trust. So those are kind of the 3 things that we're focused on, my priorities for the upcoming year at the Department of Agriculture, as I continue to secure the data and the mission of the systems.
3 very important priorities and a daunting task, no doubt. Okay, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We are talking about cybersecurity strategies, and we were just talking about priorities, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Jim. What are you have a unique situation there, a unique position there where you're going to see these different efforts going on across the departments and agencies. And what are the priorities that you're seeing out there? What are the priorities for Fortinet?
So, Luke, that's a very good question. And let me give you some of the priorities we have. One is one that is 6 months old, but it's not an oldie, and that's the pivot we all made to remote secure telework. And the good news is we all made it. We all got that implemented. We cut through red tape. The challenge is recognizing when we also cut corners on things like security policy. And human nature being what it is, where we are now with our field expedient patches or situation is likely to become the baseline for new normal. So figuring out especially how to secure that remote environment, the home user's environment. We certainly saw threat actors pivot to start to target that environment. So it's working with the agencies to say, so do you have a way to either isolate the workload of the employee or make sure that they don't have parallel VPNs or accessing other assets in the local environment? And yes, when they're bringing the traffic back to the network or to your cloud, are you actually able to do that deep packet inspection even when it's SSL encrypted? It's one thing to have the people on the security side say, yes, we have the capability, but talking to the network people who say, yes, we actually were able to implement it with that volume. We didn't turn it off because the latency was killing us. So that's one thing. The second thing that is a priority over the next year is helping agencies figure out how to spend smarter. This is one where I do a lot of work with state and local government who have watched their resources crater as a result of COVID. Now, the federal government has had the luxury, if you will, of being able to continue to operate and even run a deficit, unlike state and local government. But their current reality is your coming reality, because I would posit that a new Congress, another administration, regardless of the outcome of the election, is going to recognize deficits matter, and you'll be facing a fiscal climate that will make the sequestration we all lived through 10 years ago look mild. So helping you figure out A, how you can do IT in that environment, and B, how you can deliver cybersecurity in that environment, because we all know when the dollars get tight, one of the first things that you cut corners on is cybersecurity. So starting agencies to think about how to spend smarter, whether that's software-defined networking, whether it's solutions where you can continue, as Vina said, to leverage automation, whether it's RPA or on the security side. These are things that I think are worth thinking about now, rather than when you get the budget cuts and say, oh dear, how do I deal with this?
Right, and that's sort of, I'm thinking about risk, right, and sort of weighing your risk. And once you can sort of define and baseline that, you know, sort of where your risk posture is and how far you're willing to go and how much it's going to cost.
That's exactly what I say. When you can't afford to do everything, how do you set your priorities? And it's the classic, you know, NIST risk management framework.
100%. Wanda, I would imagine that you're looking at a lot of different priorities there at the Air Force. And tell us about your priorities that you see in front of you over the next year.
Oh, I can provide a list long, but we know that we have to focus on the critical initiatives that we want to accomplish over the next year. Cybersecurity is a key enabler, and so we have to understand where we fit into the initiatives. One of the major ones, of course, is our enterprise IT as a service model. We are well on our way. We have a number of bases that have transitioned, and part of that is to ensure that we do the cybersecurity portions for our help desk, for our infrastructure modernization moving forward. We are in our risk reduction effort phase, and so we're continuing to add bases and learning as we go. We're working very closely with the industry partners in the various areas right now. Other priorities, as Venus mentioned, is zero trust. We have to crack that nut. We are now in our pilot phase. We got approved recently, along with the other services, to move out based on our concept of operations. We are standing up our environment now and going through our testing piece over the next 45 days. And then lastly, we just need a integrated model for our, to improve our response to incidents and then our recovery efforts. We do an excellent job from a network standpoint. The areas that I want to focus on is when we have incidents on our weapons side and our control system side, because they're the last ones and they're segmented most times. And so when we get or not get the reports, we don't have an integrated picture of cybersecurity and where we stand. And so looking at all of that, the theme going into FY21 will be cyber accountability. We need more of that. We have to do it in every space that we're in. And so my goal is to ensure that we do that and do it smartly, while we also understand that we have a limitation on our resources.
Yeah, I would imagine that, you know, the good old days of guards, gates, and locks are gone, right? You have all these embedded systems in these aircraft and the airmen and the satellites. These aircraft are just, you know, flying data centers at this point, right? So zero trust seems like you just have to be able to have some sort of a capability like that in order to you know, secure this environment and do it in a way that is thoughtful and risk-based and mindful of the dollars, right? There's just not an infinite amount of dollars to do all these things. Chris, how about at InfoBlocks? I would imagine that there's a lot of priorities. You see a lot of priorities, again, across that landscape. What are you seeing out there, and what can we expect over the next few months and next year?
I think both Jim and Venus had summed up a couple of points quite well. One is you know, obviously the work from home and what is no longer new and just is normal moving forward. But Venus talked about something with respect to business driving security, and that's true. It's always been that way. The challenge has been the introduction of technology or business here, and security has been long tail behind it, and moving that up much closer to the event of changing your business model, you know, implementing new technologies like the Air Force is doing, and so on and so forth. You need to be able to have security be part of the initial conversation, is the key point of that. From our perspective, you know, as Jim had said, was, you know, work from home folks, and understanding that, you know, all of us or most of us are teleworking right now, even for this panel. I'm relying upon a Soho router, you know, that's less than $200, and that's securing my home network, which has, you know, somewhat trusted devices, but have zero security on them. You know, my kids have devices over my left shoulder that never had security built in. How does that affect my corporate systems that I'm working with here? And from our perspective, you know, InfoBlocks manages on-premise and the virtual aspects of DNS, DHCP, and IP address management combined with the threat intel. But because we also manage the DNS, we have the ability to implement that as a control point. And a lot of organizations that we come across aren't utilizing that for anything other than a service availability feature. And so we actually had that as a stopping point for all DNS traffic. And there was an FCW interview about a month ago, and the NSA cybersecurity director said, and I quote, "Secure DNS can reduce malware attacks by 92% on a given network." If you know that DNS is a gap and all you're doing is logging it or looking at it after the fact and not using that as a control point to stop, this is a gaping hole in your network. And if you can prevent 92% of attacks just within that one control point, why aren't you doing something about it? And that's the biggest question that I'm asking CISOs around the agencies that we support is, how do, you know, if you know that you could do something, if you know that you can, you know, change the lock on this door and make it harder to tamper with, you can secure that soft point. Why are you not doing it?
Right, put that lock on the door, take that off the table, right? Again, tamp that down and get you to a point where you can do some of this threat hunting type activity that Shane, you were talking about. So I know, Shane, over at Citizen and Immigration Services, there's a lot of activity going on over there, a lot of different priorities, things that you're trying to do to enable, you know, the workforce in this sort of remote environment, you know, operating environment. What priorities do you have in your job jar these days?
Yeah, USCIS was not satisfied by a single cloud. We wanted to do multi-cloud. So one of the big initiatives we're pushing is to go multi-cloud. You know, what does that mean from a system side? That means microservices and serverless deployments and the like, and the technologies around that. when you start looking at it from a security perspective, you've actually fundamentally changed what a system looks like. Actually, in so many ways, it doesn't even meet the definition under FISMA of what a system is. So we have to begin re-looking at how we authorize that, how we manage that, and how, more importantly, how we secure that. We're currently utilizing 3 different cloud providers and beginning our deployments across those clouds. So we have to be able to secure all that, and that's where, when I began my conversation, I talked about the importance of respecting the chaos. And that means having a very fluid, very nimble, security program that can pivot. So when COVID hit, one of the things we had to do was pivot and begin dealing with a workforce that on any given day was 5,000 teleworkers going to something, north of 20,000. What is the impact for an agency like us that requires in-person interviews, requires the ability to meet with the public? How do we handle that? So they quickly had to deploy interviewing technology that allows us to still interview people, but not do it face-to-face. That's a big lift. And not only that, they wanted to incorporate it. It wasn't enough just to have a webcam set up that does point to point. No, they have to have it all integrated into the systems so that they can sign and capture video and all these things. Our development teams were able to do that and do it quickly. And then the next piece, of course, is all the security wrapping around that. And so how do we manage all that? And so our focus has been having a security program that can pivot like that and move and function kind of like the agile development teams do. And in many ways we are. So, the focus for us is on that automation and on making sure that the tools that we have in place are not focused on the past, but more focused on what's coming up next. And so everything we do now is sort of focused on, hey, next generation, next this, next that, and never being satisfied with the status quo. Because I think that's sort of the trap that a lot of organizations, especially on the security side, we kind of get caught up in. That's sort of that compliance mindset. It's like, oh, look, I've got green across my scorecard. I'm good. No, I'm not good. Multi-cloud is a challenge. It doesn't add to your security. It actually makes security more challenging and more interesting. But at the same time, it offers some really interesting, new ways of doing things. Under the ATO system we're looking at doing, we're going to begin ATOing the pipelines that are developed in. Anything generated out of that pipeline falls under that ATO boundary. What does that mean? ATO in 24 hours. Not a problem.
Fantastic. That dream of ATO in a day is gonna be here at some point. I would imagine that. Yeah, it's interesting that not only are you doing the telework for the employees, you're actually trying to do this telework, sort of remote interviewing. I'm sure that that wrist posture is interesting. And look, all of you have to learn how to play pickup basketball in this environment, right? Yeah, you had a plan, you had a strategy, the world changed, and you've got to adjust accordingly. John, I would imagine over at BMC, you've got a lot of priorities. You're seeing a lot of priorities being imposed on you to solve or help solve for these departments and agencies. Tell us about those.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of the agencies are at various stages, whether it's transformation or modernization efforts that include, retirement or modernization of legacy technologies. Apart from the scanning, which is something we integrate with, and we spent a lot of time with the other panelists talking about, automation and visibility so that decision makers can really get to the point where they're making decisions, right? We provide a lot of the underpinning technology stack to identify assets, analyze, assess operational risk, and then really restore or modify, governance, right? So, really where our focus is right now is to really further expand our technology around the automation and dashboarding console, which really the goal there is providing a single view of remediation opportunities, blind spot detection, and risk and impact analysis, so that those decisions can be made, which is something that I think plagues a lot of agencies today is, something goes down or there's an outage or those kind of things. A lot of folks get in the room and it's kind of pointing fingers at one another. What'd you change? So, as I mentioned, a lot of our customers are going through various stages of transformational efforts. We're talking about multi-cloud or hybrid cloud strategies, which does provide certainly agility efforts that didn't exist today, but balancing that agility with run and reinvent and a secure focus is really where a lot of our value realization efforts are, and doing that in a very consistent and methodical way.
That balance, that delicate balance is really important from just a perspective. Again, if I'm looking at my risk posture, I've got to be able to balance these different activities, make the right choices. All right, well, we're going to roll over to a question I love to ask, which is lessons learned. And that's lessons learned on sort of the positive, or lessons learned on if I could do it over again. And Wanda, let's start with you. I'm sure there's a lot of activity that you'd like to, lessons learned that you'd like to communicate and share with our audience. Tell us about a few of them.
Oh, absolutely. What we've learned based on this pandemic, that we can pivot and we can pivot fast. We learned that we are very resilient and that we're able to make changes even to policy to facilitate a telework environment. The mission doesn't stop because of the environment. And so we're able to do that. And that, we found that policies were not as limiting as we thought they were. We've also found that, they were old and outdated. And so we went and looked at policies, made changes. We incorporated new techniques and tools to be able to move fast and forward. We understand that challenges happen. Cybersecurity is something that has to be done and not done at the end. And so some of the lessons learned is we have to collaborate. We have to be able to work with our industry partners as well as our sister services. And so part of the lessons learned is we can do it. We just need to figure out how to do it and do it smartly. Resources are limited. And so by using automation, collaboration, we know that we can continue to move forward, and cybersecurity is a key enabler in the entire process.
Right. Good catch on that policy one, right? As you're sort of breaking new ground here in this new environment, all of a sudden you realize the policies perhaps haven't kept up with them and you have to refresh them. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about cybersecurity strategies, and we were just talking about lessons learned, sort of pluses and minuses, if you will. Chris, I'm going to throw it over to you at InfoBlocks. I'm sure you've seen a lot of lessons learned out there that you'd like to impart and share with the audience.
Sure. I do a lot of consultative work with a number of agencies. One of the things that kind of slapped everybody in the face, digital transformation is happening, a lot faster than many were prepared for. As Venus said, leveraging your fellow CIOs, your CISOs. As a former Air Force blue suiter, Wanda, I know that the Air Force is leading the charge over the Army and the Navy and the Marines. So go at it. Leveraging those folks to kind of short circuit, zero trust and, federated approaches to security. We're all pushing forward together to continue to do the mission, whatever that mission may be. Let's not all, get burnt by the fire at the same time. Learn from your peers. Second, don't overestimate the capabilities of various technologies. A lot of times you'll see things that are, oh yeah, we also do that, and we come across that approach. One case in particular is a VPN. When I talk to various organizations, and they say, oh, but it's okay, we have a VPN. Not to discount VPN technologies, they're really great at one of the aspects of the CIA triad, which is confidentiality of data in transit. But it's really good at transporting malware. It's really good at transporting malware communications that traverse the tunnel. There is nothing about the overarching aspect of security that's built into a VPN. It just creates a secure tunnel, and it doesn't care about what goes through. And so it's kind of, understanding the aspects of what are the capabilities of adversaries, their tactics, their techniques, the procedures, and generalizing that aspect. As we've seen, the InfoBlocks has done a lot of work with a couple of agencies around taking down domains that have been very nefarious to COVID activities, from the research and even the financial aspect of delivering the PPP checks and such to entities. when we find something that's out there that's bad on the internet, we knock it down. But it's a phishing attack most often. It's the theme of the attack that often changes, not the methodology. And that's the other aspect is that people are realizing that and are just shifting to look for and address those particular pieces.
Yeah, I mean, everyone got sort of smashed in the face, if you will, during this whole digital transition, and then over this, remarkable transition over into a fully remote virtual environment. Venus, let's ask you about your lessons learned. You've been through a lot of activities over there, a bunch of activities that I think very large departments and agencies would dream of being able to do with their SOC consolidations, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you've got some really fantastic lessons learned. You'd like to impart some wisdom on this community.
Well, thank you. I actually do like this question, because the thing about lessons learned is that means that you are, in order to learn, you need to document what you're doing, right? And always take a look back when you're completed an activity. And so as Wanda said, collaboration is key. That public-private partnership and working with the industry partners is key. And we saw that here in COVID in our current environment. With all of the industry partners that are within USDA, having that meeting to say, okay, here's where we are, what's my investment, am I maximizing my investment, how can I use my investment in this current posture? So that was one of the key things we learned, was collaborating with our industry partners. And I had already, I'm happy to say that that's something that I did when I arrived here at USDA, was meeting with the industry partners just to make sure that I didn't have just tools for tools' sake, but that I had the right tools for the capabilities I need to secure USDA. The other lesson learned, and Chris, you touched on it, was we have to teach and remind our system owners and business owners to bake cybersecurity in, because it's definitely more expensive to bolt it on when you're done. And when they're planning for modernization efforts, to include cybersecurity as well. A secure SDLC or CI/CD, a DevSecOps, those aren't just buzzwords. Those should be the way that we do business. So I think having to teach sometimes and remind and work with our business owners, that's key. And I can't say enough about governance. What I learned was governance is key. And in that, I don't mean just people sitting around the table, and saying we had a governance meeting, but I mean a real decision-making body whereby you can tie your investments to that governance body, your requirements to that governance body. And if ever asked the question, you actually have an opportunity and a way that you can go back and say, we did this and made this decision because of this. And that's what governance will allow you to do, and having the right people at the table. And then, of course, codifying the work that you're doing is very important. When we started the SecOps consolidation, I codified it in the cybersecurity framework. I codified, my workforce with the NICE framework, because that ensured that it's not personality driven, because when the day and time come that I leave USDA, I like to know that the work will continue because it is rooted and grounded in a policy and a standard. And it wasn't just, I'm going to say a Venus-ism, so to speak. And so those are the lessons that I think I've learned. And I would share, with my industry counterparts and my federal counterparts here, is really, baking it in, maintaining governance, and make sure that you codify, and you cannot collaborate enough.
Amen on that one. Shane, how about top lesson learned? I know you've been doing a lot of activities over there. Give us the top lesson learned.
The nice thing about a DevSecOps sort of environment that we work in is the concept of failure being a positive. Fail early, fail often is sort of that concept, and learn quickly. And so, failure for us is sort of is something we accept and actually kind of, I wouldn't say enjoy, but embrace. And so a couple things we've learned out of that, especially being one of the early adopters of cloud, if your infrastructure is code, your security is code. What does that mean for a security operation? That means you're going to have developers in your SOC. Every cloud incident I have worked required developers. Not just security analysts, not just SOC analysts, actual developers. So, you look at the actual nature and makeup of my SOC has changed because of that. You recognize that and recognize that any of the security aspects, any of the security apparatuses that you're going to put in place, you're going to want developers there as well. And so that's one of the first big changes, one of the first things we learned very quickly that we needed in our security operations. The second thing that we did, and this seems really quite obvious, but for whatever reason we seem to forget to do it, is sort of the easy button approach to security. One of the, USCIS has been wildly successful with our approach to doing zero trust. We are fully single sign-on across the agency. Most of our major systems, almost all of our business systems, have all of our authorizations and roles and all that are baked into our ICAM program. So we've really done this great job of doing that. The reason we've been so successful at it, though, is we made it easy. In other words, we made it to the advantage of the system owners and the business owners to want to do this. It wasn't something that I had to force them to do. It's something they just actually want to do, because at the end of the day, it makes their lives better. And so that we took that approach and been pushing that out in other things like secrets management within cloud becomes unbelievably critical. Something that we didn't necessarily see coming, but in managing our secrets has become such a critical aspect of our security operations that I can't foot stomp it enough. Get in front of it first and fast and stay in front of it. If not, you will get owned.
Right.
So, I think there's a couple of things we've learned so far. I'm sure we'll learn something more tomorrow.
I'm sure you will. Simplification, very important. Well, we're gonna wrap it up with our last question here that we always like to talk about, sort of painting a picture of the future, if you will. John, let's start with you. Sort of, what does it look like in 2 years from now? What can we expect from BMC, from the ecosystem?
Yeah, so we know in terms of what the future holds, we know our adversaries on this front continue to come up with new and inventive ways to penetrate. So, I think as we look at it, is elimination a possibility? Is that probably realistic? Potentially not, right? I think at BMC, we do think, however, that there's a great opportunity in front of us to be as efficiently as possible, right? So, when we look at where we're headed, we look at blind spot detection, largely done in a zero footprint environment, but it's limited by hindrances or areas where we can manage or remediate, right? If we consider the ability to ensure, security, automating across multiple environments, whether that's multi-cloud, hybrid, or physical in a zero footprint environment, can drastically increase the time to value for agencies, and I think make them much more agile, right? So when you look at it, when you're breaking that down a little bit, compliance controls, full system of, full cycle of system discovery, monitoring, remediation, and change control, a security view of operational plans, right? Visualize elimination of risk with graphical views of planned operations, predictive SLAs and burn downs, and then service and operational analytics, right? So
a way to sort of tie it all together, it sounds like, right?
Exactly, right? So bringing that together into a, visibility analytics and automation into a single operational console is really in the near window for us, and something we're really excited to continue to mature.
Fantastic. Jim, Fortinet, what can we expect to see sort of around the corner, if you will?
So to build on the comments that John had said, and to paraphrase a classic movie, the future is not plastics, it's platform. And by platform, I don't mean cloud versus on-prem. I mean the thought that there are these broad ecosystems of devices that you can put across the breadth of the attack surface. We always talk about the growing attack surface makes our life complicated. Yes, but if you instrument it, and if the instrumentation is sensors, and if it's reporting, and we're using this big data analytics, and we're then able to automate our response, this actually allows us to take the advantage away from the attacker. I mean, if you step back strategically, this is a tipping point, because attackers are not perfect. We all know they try and fail innumerable times before they succeed. When you do an incident investigation and you look at the firewall log, you go, yep, here's when and how they got in, and you look farther back in the cron file and you go, and look, here's all the failed attempts. They've relied on the fact that we're not looking everywhere in real time. If you get an alert in the SOC, you don't know if it's a false positive or a real one. Even if you decide it is legitimate, is it significant, or is it a tier 1 alert? And if I do know this is worth responding to, how do I respond? The AI and ML lets you do that. And it's not something that has to come from one vendor. There are broad ecosystem families. So my vision of the future is one where When you do procurement, you add a third P to the criteria. We always look at performance, we look at price, but we don't look at platform. And as a former big dollar federal procurement person, for me, a bad outcome would have been to upgrade 3 parts of my security infrastructure and realize only after the fact that I had bought into 3 different platform families, because I'm not getting redundancy. I'm not getting something that provides checks and balances on the weaknesses of each one. I'm leaving synergy lying on the cutting room floor. So my vision of the future is we recognize this is a reality and we start saying any platform is better than no platform. But recognize it's an additional criteria we ought to be looking at.
I like that third P. Chris, info blocks. What can we expect around the corner over the horizon?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you know, work from home really is the new normal. We're also now starting to see study from home. The big challenge with all of that is that we're busier, and how are we more effective? One of the challenges with everything that's going along, and we've even experienced it in the course of this particular webcast, is we can't just talk to each other during the breaks the way we could in the studio. You can't just walk down the hall anymore and talk to somebody. We are now more and more reliant upon the resources of the connection to the internet and connection to the apps, connection to our cloud resources. We have to focus on 3 things. You know, security first, after availability. You know, get availability out of the way. We've done that largely, but now you have to focus on the security behind it, blocking out the intruders or containing them. Second, with most everything in the cloud, and let's face it, if you're at home, the cloud could be an on-premise data center. It's still away from you. We're dependent upon that connectivity and resiliency. You know, you have to be able to connect with people, data, and applications. I think that some of the actors that are going to be out there, especially from a nation state perspective, are going to be looking for the continued ways into networks, but also how can I mess with, you know, an entire agency's cloud system and shut them off? I mean, we all have dealt with, you know, what happens when there are glitches in our online, you know, telesystems like Zoom and others when there's a heavy demand and all of a sudden everything starts glitching or whatever. We have to be resilient and we have to have connectivity. Your cloud must be there at all times, standing ready despite any physical or virtual attacks that may be knocking at the door.
100% have to have it locked down, have to button up all those new attack surfaces. Shane, what can we expect at USCIS? You know, is it, if I'm going to be looking for benefits in the future, will I be able to do it virtually, even in a post-COVID world?
We're close. We're getting there. You know, for me, you know, from a security perspective, you know, my goal is to build a security program that can detect, respond, and recover from a zero-day attack, and have the cyber hygiene to require one. You know, so what does that mean? You know, I respect the fact, I expect that the future is going to hold a no perimeter sort of infrastructure. You know, when we moved into the cloud, and the more we've moved into the cloud, you know, we still pretend to have a perimeter, but it's just that we're pretending. That perimeter is gone. It has been gone for a while. We need to recognize that, embrace it, and more importantly, secure that. Moving heavily, you know, we've already started our inroads into the zero trust model, extending that out even further, going it down all the way down to the data level, the metadata level, hardware, software, every aspect of your enterprise has to have that built in, and it has to be built in from the ground up. You know, if I'm going to end the perimeter, you know, users are going to come in through the internet. They're just going to, there's no more VPN. That's gone. So now you have to start talking about your levels of trust, you know, and trust is not a black or white, it's very gray. So you have to talk about degrees of trust and how you degrade trust over time. And so you have to really begin thinking and building those models out. And I think the last thing, you know, I really see, you know, we've made a lot of inroads here in USCIS, is building out a security culture, recognizing that the cybersecurity is the responsibility of every user, not just the security shop. But, you know, and that's a great platitude to say, and it's a great thing to put on a plaque, but how do you do that? You know, how do you drive that? How do you make that real? There's a number of initiatives that, around different programs and different aspects to get people involved. There's an aspect of training and focus training. Your training should not be universal. Your computer security awareness training for a seasoned executive should not be the same as that of someone who's working in one of our field offices. There's got to be a variation. It's got to be role-based. It's got to be based on the actual threats that one perceives for that individual and the roles that they serve the agency in. So that model is the future. That's where we're heading, and making sure that users understand their responsibility inside that model.
100%. Every employee has to be a cyber warrior, so to speak. Venus, how about at USDA? And on behalf of every rancher, every farmer, I want to thank you for everything you and your team are doing. What can we expect? What's it going to look like in a couple of years?
Shane, that was a good lead in, because what I talk about here is how do we inculcate a culture of cyber at USDA, meaning that cybersecurity is everyone's business and not just the 2210 or IT professionals. And so in order to do that, of course, being, one of the critical infrastructures, food safety, food security, agriculture, we saw that here during the pandemic, that it was very important that the security of the services that we provide in those systems was key. And so in order to move forward, we're going to continue to definitely work on our zero trust, continue to build our threat hunt capability so that we can stay ahead as much as possible to the attackers, really, and start to think like them and really war game some of these scenarios in advance within our SOC, and having, exercises within cyber exercises within USDA with our mission areas. We started down that path with Cyberstorm 2020. And so we'll continue that here at Department of Agriculture. Definitely you'll see us quantify risk, because it's important to understand the cost of the risk that we are actually accepting, and even the reputational risk that goes into that. Maximizing AI and ML in the SOC so that we can be proactive and preemptive, and making sure that we can respond and recover appropriately. And then, of course, I cannot do any of this without a skilled workforce. So making sure that we make the investment in our workforce, the training that they need, certifications that they need, the time off that they need, making sure that people are balancing that work-life balance. And we see that a lot here during COVID with all the Zoom meetings. And so as we move forward at USDA, continue to do the things that we're already doing, but really build upon some of the other things I think we need to do better. And those are some of the areas that I'll focus on.
Outstanding. Wanda, how about U.S. Air Force? Bring us home here in regards to what can we expect it to look like in a couple of years? What's an airman going to expect as they come out of the academy?
Shane and Venus hit it right on the head. We are all trying to do the same thing. The culture is extremely important. We know that we want to continue with the basic cybersecurity hygiene, very important. We want to continue to migrate to the cloud, zero trust, and ensure that we have the policies that support the new environment that we find ourselves in. We've done great with our SecDevOps, but we must not forget about our legacy systems. That continues to be a focal point, because you can't move everything to the cloud. It takes too much money to transform a lot of our legacy apps. And so we want to make sure we continue to secure those as well. We want to make sure that we have a data-driven and threat-informed intelligence process. We find that, due to lack of resources, you can't secure everything. We have to have a balance between cybersecurity risk, operational risk, and other risks, that we have an integrated model that lets us determine what vulnerability is the most important to fix, and then how does it transform across the entire enterprise. And so just like my fellow panel members, we all have a lot to do. We continue to achieve and celebrate the successes, but we also need to ensure that as we move into the future, that we have the right eyesight on what's important, why it's important, and then how does it really help the mission.
Can't thank you enough. You certainly do have a lot to do, and you certainly have done a whole lot. I'd like to thank today's guests for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable, And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.